Hi, and welcome to the February meetup of CocoaHeadsNL. We are a monthly meetup of developers. We are part of the International CocoaHeads Meetup organization. We talk about anything Apple, Cocoa, Objective-C, and Swift-related technologies. These are our sponsors. They make it possible for us to execute these meetups every month. If you want to have some swag branded with CocoaHeadsNL logos, please have a look at our shop, CocoaHeadsNL/shop. You can also win a JetBrains product coupon code. Join us on Slack in #meetups and enter the raffle. If you're not on our Slack yet, please use this invite link to join us as well. The agenda for today is Ryan McLeod. UI kit engineers hate him, how a Blackbox challenge is made. The creator Ryan will take us through creating a Blackbox challenge combining animations, accessibility, audio, and perhaps one or more things. Please have a look at our meetup page for announcements and our next meetup in March. Did you download our Apple TV app yet? Did you subscribe to our YouTube channels? Did you have a look at our jobs? And most of all, did you sign up for our newsletter? See you next month again.
Is this me? Hey everyone, I'm here to talk about Blackbox and how a challenge is made. This talk is titled UI Engineers Hate Him, UI Kit Engineers. Shout out to Pim Commons for that title. It's a great title. Funny enough, came up with it before the talk and then realized the challenge I'm about to talk about doesn't really use a lot of UI Kit. And I know a few people that work on UI Kit, and I don't think they hate me. So maybe it's just a clickbait. So before we get started, if you haven't already, I'll give you a minute to grab Blackbox. It's free, some in-app purchases. And I apologize in advance for completely spoiling one of the challenges, but there's 70 something more for you to solve. So hopefully that's scanned. So hi everyone, I am Ryan McLeod. I'm warpling on everything. Feel free to DM me on Twitter, find me on Clubhouse, whatever is new, send me something. So I live in Amsterdam it's been 2.5 years now in the Netherlands. Before that, I lived in California, and a lot of Dutchies ask me why I would move to the Netherlands. I think there's a lot of good reasons. You have great bikes, sort of work-life balance, amazing infrastructure, but there's one reason that almost no one talks about that I think is really important, and that's the super native iOS apps that are made here. I didn't even realize NS was a sponsor, I promise, but you have this amazing NS app, which is sort of the transit app for getting all over the Netherlands, whether it's by boat or tram or train, and it's just a really nice app for seeing where everything is going, where your transfers are, what the platform is. It's really well made. Versus in the US, I'm very used to our Amtrak app with our nice credit card point offer and some of these very spacious views. Another app that I really like here is PostNL, which is sort of like for checking your mail. It shows me like all of the mail scanned before it's delivered. I can like generate postcode or stamps that I can write. It has widgets. It supports dark mode. USPS is on its way with some really lovely web views and some misaligned icons. Feel bad ripping on USPS, but there's other apps like Ticket Swap. It's really nice. Marktplaats, Dutch Craigslist. A lot of you probably don't like it. If anyone in the Netherlands is maybe thinking that, but compared to this, which is the US alternative for it, it's you're doing pretty well. So really nice community here, and I think a lot of these people behind these apps are involved in CocoaHeads. So thank you for letting me join you. So I am here to talk about Blackbox, which is probably what I'm best known for. And Blackbox is a very different kind of puzzle game where you generally don't touch the screen. It's comprised of a lot of different puzzles that can vary on how they work based on like simple device movements to celestial movement. And it's really hard to say a lot more without spoiling it, but if you know, you know. So Blackbox was awarded an Apple Design Award in 2017 for excellence in design with an emphasis on accessibility that I'll get into later. It's been a really wild 5 years coming up on. I've gotten to meet all sorts of people around the world. People have gone some dangerous places for Blackbox, including Everest. I don't think Blackbox sent them there, but I like to think it was partially inspired. There's Blackbox merch all around the world. There's a lot of really cool fan art. We have some Blackbox dogs. And I think just generally Blackbox has improved a lot of people's lives. At least I like to think that. And yeah, there's also a Blackbox tattoo out in the world, which I'm very flattered and have very mixed feelings about. So it's been a big journey. It's kind of how it started versus where we are now. Blackbox is something went from 40 something challenges to around 80. It's in about 22 languages from Dutch to Georgian. It's about to come out on iPad next week. Supports dynamic type. It's fully accessible. Supports switch control. Has a ton of sound. Has new haptics. List goes on. There's merch. You can buy it in app with cryptocurrency and Apple Pay. Point is, like, the app has gotten very, very complicated. So I would like to talk about just one tiny part of this that I've wanted to talk about for a long time, which is one of my favorite challenges. And this one I internally call dark scan. And it's part of a series of challenges that use the camera, but unlike similar challenges, it doesn't use any QR codes. So you can see, if you're wondering where it is on your grid, or if you've just started, it's this little turquoise one down in the corner here. So to talk about all this, I'm going to break it up into 4 sections. I'll try to keep it to half an hour. We're going to talk about the level design, the visual design and implementation, the audio design, and accessibility. So starting with the level design, I think there's a common misconception that I'm out of level ideas, probably because I haven't put out a new challenge in a long time. There's a good reason for that. But the truth is I have too many ideas. There's always been a lot of ideas. I also have a wonderful Discord of thousands of crazy people that submit fantastic ideas all the time. The problem isn't ideas, it's more figuring out how to implement them well and, yeah, how to really execute on them. I promise when I say I have plenty of ideas, there are, it's not a limited resource. So I thought I'd talk about kind of where an idea comes from really briefly. I think this challenge of dark scan is fairly obvious in hindsight. And the idea is that you find or make a black square in your environment and you scan it. It kind of just comes from the name of the app, Blackbox. But I think the inspiration came from some other places too. This was around summer 2017. I just started making some merch. So there's this idea of like having to scan a logo on the merch or something like that. ML Kit had just come out. Thought maybe we could train a machine learning model type thing. Seemed really gimmicky, probably too hard or error prone. I remember a friend had one of those like pin art board things where you like can push your hand into and see the impression. I think that was a big influence. I honestly don't remember that much. There's plenty of other sources. Just the other day, I was looking at this sort of washing machine barrel fire pit, and that kind of has some cool inspiration into some of these pixel effects. Point is, inspiration kind of comes from everywhere. So as far as taking the idea and turning it into a plan, it's interesting because if you have this sort of idea of you have a black square and you want to make an app that's as intuitive as possible to find it and scan it, you could just provide those as instructions, make a camera view, make it kind of turn green when the thing is scanned. But it wouldn't really be any fun. You would just scan it and it would be done. And a big part of creating a puzzle is sort of creating a gap in that understanding. So one way I like to think about it is like this. If you have you want to design the most intuitive interface possible. And in Blackbox, I always try to do that without the use of any language. So something generally visual. And you want to be able to take this interface and then sort of break it. So if you imagine you have this fort here in Groningen, if you have this sort of lovely path into its center where the answer is, if you took that interface then and sort of put a moat around it and split it up so it became less intuitive, and then you have this gap now, which you can let the player connect. And that sort of is the aha moment that makes Blackbox so satisfying and fun to play. Now, a lot of different puzzles take different strategies with this sort of stuff. So if you imagine like a jigsaw puzzle, like everyone knows how to solve it. It's mostly just time and difficulty, I guess, versus like some of these desk toys that are like rope and metal. It's not clear how to solve it, and you might kind of have a strategy, but you just mess with it for a while. And then eventually, I find these frustrating because I think they just kind of like come apart in your hands, and then often you don't know how you did it. That's not super satisfying. And the approach I like to take with Blackbox is a little bit more like baby rattles. So this is sort of proprioception and how we learn proprioception. So the idea with these, if you're not familiar, is like they're kind of crinkly or they have bells or make sounds, and you put them on a baby's wrist or their legs. And as their like mushy brain is just trying stuff and limbs are flailing, they can sort of associate more sensory input with the thing that they're doing. And eventually we learn how the controls work, and hopefully we can like solve problems in the world. So I like to think about Blackbox's interface as sort of like that, where it's providing this sort of rattle where you are able to learn how your world is affecting the challenge, and it guides you to figuring out that solution. And then actually carrying out the solution is not the difficult part. Sometimes it is, but mostly it's figuring it out and then just executing it. So once there's a good idea, the question is kind of how to build it next. And this involves like looking through SDKs and APIs usually to see if the problem is feasible. And for anyone that doesn't know, that's just kind of the tools available to anyone making an iPhone app to do things with the sensors. So when I was evaluating this idea to see if it was feasible, I first looked at OpenCV, Open Computer Vision. It's an open source project for detecting things in camera feeds. I'd done some work with it before and knew that scanning objects with hard edges was easy, but it was kind of a bulky, big framework to use for this. Core Image Detector is Apple's sort of built-in thing, which I knew worked really well with still images, but was like quite jittery with live video and such. And then the last but not least is like straight up pixel buffer. So that just means like the actual color values of the grid of pixels making up the image. And from that, you can do anything with enough math. So once sort of there was a understanding that this challenge was going to be possible to implement in the way I wanted, the next thing was to figure out the visuals of it. And one of the things that's nice about working by myself, not with a giant team, is this kind of can happen at the same time as the level design phase, and these can work really nicely in tandem. So I kind of began exploring them at the same time. Like I mentioned, this sort of pin art thing had been in my mind, and I had made some other challenges that had these pixelated views. So that seemed like a really obvious idea, but not quite right. Wasn't satisfied with it. I started browsing with my favorite algorithm, Pinterest. It's always scary because you just scroll and it seems to get to know you better and better. And I found something that kind of stuck out to me, which was this grid thing, which you might think maybe this is someone's art or something, but it turns out it was just this downloadable pattern pack. So shout out to David ZYDD. So I got kind of fixated on this, and normally I would jump to paper first, but since this idea was just black squares, I just hopped directly into Sketch. From there, I sort of drew out some squares, threw that on my phone with the Sketch Mirror, sort of looked at how it felt, and sort of arrived at these two visual elements. So from here, I had this idea of these grid of black squares that would get larger and smaller based on the luminosity of like the pixels behind them, and this reticle like on a camera. So the idea was that this grid would kind of represent the camera feed and what was happening and guide you towards what in the world was affecting this challenge. And the reticles could grow to kind of complete themselves into a square when you were close to solving the answer. And this works really well because if you've ever seen like an Apple Watch with the rings, humans really hate like incomplete shapes, especially when you have this nice like motion easing on this. So it very quickly comes close together, and then the last 10% is kind of 50% of the work. And one way to think of this is kind of like the how and the what of it. One is what input and how the sensor works, and the other is what is your goal here. And a fun side effect of this design was, I don't remember how intentional this was, but just the idea that like you're looking at a bunch of black squares and like you're trying to find a black square. It has a nice meta-ness to it where the answer is staring you in the face the whole time. So after thinking about it a lot further, doing a lot of whiteboard and paper math, and apparently posting artsy photos of it on Instagram, I just found all these. It seemed the most natural to use just the straight pixel buffers to drive it. And that would keep the visual really tight to the actual sensor input. And from there, the idea of building it was basically to use AV capture session, which generally provides the kind of camera feed that you would show filtered images on. That can come in different sizes on different devices. So I would do kind of an aspect fill on that and crop the image. From there, it's as simple as applying a bunch of core image filters. So I kind of changed the image to be monochrome, boosted the gamma of it, sort of washed out the really light elements, and then resize it down. And what you end up with is this really nice 2D array of luminosity values. Now from here, this can be pumped straight to this sprite kit scene of SK shape nodes. And I think I must have, for the UI kit part of this talk, I must have tried it with core animation layers when I first built it and seen a lot of performance issues because I tend to avoid scene kit at all costs unless I need to do a bunch of physics. But it works really well in this case because it's very straightforward. So for the other visual, I'm able to take that array of luminosity values and do a bunch of math and get this nice progress value that ranges from 0 to 1 for how close to completion the player is. And that can drive this reticle to kind of open and close, and also drive a bunch of the audio and other things. So the math, just to clarify, I first had this sort of thing where it was just looking at an average luminosity of the section where the square is supposed to be scanned. Very quickly discovered that if you run this and your phone is laying on the table and the entire screen is black, then you just solved the challenge. So not very fun. Very easily solved by also checking this outer ring, making sure it's above a certain luminosity, and then checking the contrast between those two and coming up with that value. There's a little bit more to this, but that's the gist of it. So moving through these quickly. All of the audio in Blackbox is done by my sound engineer, Gus Callahan. And all of it is powered by AudioKit. AudioKit is this insane open source audio library for iOS that powers a lot of the software that DJs you know and love use. And it also means every single challenge in Blackbox can be powered by its own digital synthesizer. So if you imagine a setup of having a keyboard and filters and wires running between all these different things, it basically allows you to build any of those completely digitally in software. This is a large part of what makes Blackbox accessible to blind players. These kind of alternative sonic interfaces that I'll talk about. So the audio in this challenge, if you're not familiar, this is a little clip of what it sounds like. You can hear it kind of change. You can hear this kind of repeating sound come in. So that whole thing is made out of 4 like static sounds, basically, which is pretty insane. And how that's built up, trying to advance the slide here. Oh. I'm having okay, there we go. So I'll have to do this through you guys. You have this first player here that if we go, will play its sound. So it does this repeating sound. And then you have this other player that is looping. So we call this one the sort of donk player. So this one gets repeated. It just plays the entire time. And then we also have these other ones. If we, there we go. So this one is kind of the ambient player that plays the entire time. And then we have another one that this one gets mixed in. It's very similar. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out some slide control issues here. So this all gets fed into a mixer, which if you think of, it's kind of like a USB hub of sorts. So all this audio comes in and all of it eventually needs to go out to whatever your output is. So that could be the speakers or AirPods or whatever is connected. So what's interesting here is the opening player its output can be directly wired into the mixer. And that just means when it gets played, it immediately gets heard. But some of these other ones we want to do more advanced things with. So something like this donk player is just going to continue to make this sound, but we can feed it into a varispeed, which we can adjust how quickly the sound is played back. And then that can be wired into a bit crusher, which sort of does like an 8-bit type effect and lowers the sort of resolution of the sound, kind of adds a nice chiptune effect. I think this is some of the genius in Gus's sound design, where this kind of matches in parallel with the visuals, where you have this very pixelated view, and this is like literally pixelating the sound. So that gets connected directly to the mixer. And then the next thing we have to deal with are these 2 players. So there's this dry-wet mixer that they both get fed into. Dry-wet like confused me for a really long time. A better way to think about it is just like hot-cold. So you can kind of mix these 2 together however you want. And that gets fed into a varispeed, so we can adjust the speed along with the donk player. It gets passed through a delay and eventually also gets bit crushed and fed into the mixer. And then you have this entire thing playing the whole time, and as everything else is happening, we can adjust all the parameters on these. So as the player gets closer to solving the challenge, the speed can be increased, the volumes can be changed, the mix can be adjusted. And that's how you end up with that sound, which I'm going to play again so you can kind of listen to and see if you can hear some of the repeating players come in and sort of change as it gets closer to the answer. So maybe now you can understand a little bit of the craziness and some of the sound design in Blackbox there. Oops. RF control. It's like having some technical. 1 second. It's a very crazy setup here. It's a similar complexity of dealing with video. Cool. Okay. I think we're back here. So last but definitely not least, I wanted to talk about the accessibility in Blackbox. When I know I laid out the talk like this, I'm still not quite sure this is the right way to do this, but really accessibility is a consideration at all of these steps the entire time. I think it's a little easier to talk about it at the end like this, but it's something that I think about when designing the levels, when thinking of the visuals, and especially the audio and voice control and stuff like that. And accessibility is about making our apps just able to be used by everyone, depending on if that state is sort of permanent or temporary. And if I couldn't make this challenge accessible, if I couldn't have thought of a way to do it, I wouldn't have made it. So accessibility, I think those that know it in the iOS world tend to think of it as voiceover and labeling our elements and such. But it's a lot more than that. It's the overall design. And in Blackbox, it's also supporting things like switch control and full dynamic type and respecting when users request reduced motion and reduced transparency and things like that. In Blackbox, it's very interesting. So some of these challenges are the game originally was completely visual. And when some players, blind players, approached me and asked if the game was accessible, I had to start thinking if this was something that actually was a blocker or if this was something that I could solve. And I think part of the determination in making Blackbox fully accessible was kind of a proof that if this game can be, then your apps definitely can also. You might be wondering how this works though. So one of the first challenges in Blackbox is this red challenge here. And this involves moving the device around and seeing these visuals move around to sort of tell the orientation. And if you're blind, there's this sonic interface. And even if you're not, this also helps. So hopefully you can hear this here. This sort of guides you where the sounds get louder and sound more pleasing as you get close to the edges and close to your answers. This challenge has no voiceover in it whatsoever, and it's completely solvable. I still remember the first time I watched a blind tester solve this challenge, and he got through it with ease. And it really blew my mind to think about. I've watched so many hundreds of people solve this challenge, and they have all solved it through seeing this visual. And this person had a completely different interface to understanding the whole thing and was able to solve it and have the same satisfaction. Other challenges rely on voiceover a little bit more. Here you can hear some of them.
Voiceover on.
So a lot of these elements are labeled.
Clue. Large slider. 78% on.
By
Clue.
swiping around and navigating,
switch. Off.
players can
Clue.
listen into
Small switch.
what
on.
the state of these different
Light
items
2 of
are.
4. Unsolved.
And there's also
Aligned
sounds
with
that
top
help.
of large slider and left.
So this challenge poses a really interesting problem because it is completely visual and it's also very finicky. It wants this pixel level precision of this black box being exactly in this reticle. And if you are visually impaired, this is probably going to be pretty difficult to line up correctly. But when I was in that phase of thinking through the APIs and what I could use, I had the idea to use Core Image Detector as sort of an alternative interface. And it's typically a bit of a no-no to like create a different way of doing something versus making the primary way accessible. But I think in this case, it's okay because the challenge is a little bit, it asks for a little bit more as far as like that square being really straight and such, but it's more forgiving in that the square can be anywhere on screen. And so the way I thought to do that was with the Core Image Detector. Here you'll see I sort of made a little metal view for seeing the camera view and overlaying what the Core Image Detector sees. And these polygons are squares that it thinks are potential squares maybe. And with this sort of debug test here, I was able to see that this would be a plausible way to make this work with some additional work. So if this is normally what the challenge visual looks like to everyone, I have sort of a debug mode I can turn on that makes it look like this. And with CI detector, you get these polygons, but you just get points, corners. So in this case, I get these corner positions when it thinks there's a potential square. And from there, I can generate edge lengths. I can get corner angles. I can look for sort of the average color of that shape. And I can generate a whole bunch of other things, including orthogonality, which is just how parallel that shape is, and the squareness of the rectangle. From there, we can basically do a different kind of math and come up with a new progress based on how square the rectangle is and its darkness and such. And that can drive the visuals, but it can also drive the audio from the audio graph that I talked about, and it can provide some additional voiceover feedback. So now the game can kind of announce these things. As the player is moving the phone around, they're hearing sound change a little bit, and when it changes just enough and something is just plausible enough, it might announce one of these. And then with that and the sonic interface, players can kind of be guided towards a solution. And here I'm going to play what that sounds like.
Challenge type 47. Clue. Black squares on a grid changing in size based on something.
Sound like a lot.
Large. Semi-dark colored square detected. Square is not parallel with camera. Small. Semi-dark colored square detected. Square is not parallel with camera. Small. Semi-dark colored square detected. Small. Semi-dark colored square detected. Square is not parallel with camera.
Some threshold adjustment there. But so that's one challenge. There are many, many more that are just as complex or a lot simpler. I hope that gave you some insight into how Blackbox functions and maybe gave you some ideas for your apps, and serves as a nice example of how you can make something like this possible and make it completely accessible. So if anyone has questions or comments, I think I will be around answering some of those now. Finding my questions here. Cool. So I think I'm reading these here. So let's see what we had. Unit tests. I wish I could claim that there are tests. I initially wrote some tests, but being an independent developer, there are no tests. There's a lot of beta testers and a lot of thinking carefully, but next project will definitely start with tests. There's a question on YouTube of, did Apple feature this app? Yes, quite a few times. That's been one of the things that helps me do this independently, are those features. So it's been game of the day and featured in a few other puzzle categories and stuff like that, along with the design award was a nice feature. Let's see what else we have here. We have Did he create some kind of nice setup to easily jump into a certain level during development? Yeah, there's a lot of I have a whole bunch of hidden things in the debug build that allow me to like remove transitions, to videotape things for promo materials. That challenge specifically, I use Swift tweaks and FB tweaks, and those I can like jump in and adjust a lot of different thresholds and parameters, which during testing is a lot faster than recompiling the app over and over. Someone asked if the iPad app is built with Swift UI. No, it took me probably over 2 years to get everything ready for iPad, but I haven't touched Swift UI too much yet, to be honest. I found some of the animation stuff that I do is a little difficult, but when I have some downtime, I would like to start messing with it more. The whole app was also originally written in Objective-C because I started on it 6 years ago or so, and Swift was brand new. But now about half of it and most of what I work in day to day is Swift. It's awesome. It's a debug mode accessible in the App Store version. I'm not quite sure what you mean, but there's a like the accessible or the I have developer menus in the app. I think actually a lot of them are localized and they're definitely accessible because they use all the same UI that the rest of the game uses. There's someone, Eugene writes that their 12-year-old daughter started to learn Swift Playgrounds from Blackbox, which is really, really cool. I use Playgrounds to test stuff in Blackbox, so that's awesome. And then we have, did you start to work on it full time straight away? Basically, I thought it might not be possible, but I was living pretty cheaply in California. Definitely thought there would be this like giant amount of becoming a millionaire gold rush type thing if it succeeded, and then very quickly realized that you have kind of this that graph of like getting featured by Apple and then drops off, and then learning like, oh, this is actually just going to be like a lot of work. But did see the path forward immediately and was able to do that. Had a few times of like applying to jobs and stuff and thinking it wasn't going to work anymore, but managed to pull it through. And how long did it take to build the first 40 levels? I think that's really interesting because the first 40 something levels I built in a year with the rest of the game. And since then, my development has slowed considerably. Supporting all the sort of accessibility stuff, having 22 localized languages, supporting more different kinds of hardware, doing all the sound, all these things have made it take a lot longer to add challenges. So I think 40 in the first year working on it, and then about 40 in the next 4 years. So things have slowed down. Man, there's a lot of questions. From Kareem, have you used any machine learning models? I haven't. I've always been curious to, but I always found it a little bit, found them a little finicky and difficult. And I think I've just kind of been intimidated. I've been wanting to mess with Lobe AI, which I think makes that a lot more accessible. But it might be better as a different game. Not sure. And when you started building it, did you look into other games that are somewhat similar? Perlu, maybe. Perlu rings a bell. I'm trying to remember what. There were some things that inspired it. One was like the to-do list clear. They had some like secret themes that unlocked if you like open the app really late at night. And then there was this Inception app for the movie as a promotion. And that had some really weird things in it. Like if you opened it while it was raining, it unlocked something. If you opened it in Africa, it unlocked something. And I thought that was really cool, along with like all these other apps from the beginning of the App Store that there was like a pocket warmer that just like turned on all the sensors. There was like a bulldozer that used the vibration motor to like push the phone across the table. It was like there was an air blower for like blowing out candles. Like people were doing really cool stuff. And then all of a sudden, everyone was just doing like lowest common denominator, like fits under a glass screen, works on the web, works on Android, does everything, not taking advantage of any of the interesting sensors. And I really wanted to do that. There was one app, Progress 100, that I discovered like halfway through making Blackbox that it wasn't inspired by, but is kind of very similar and cool. Is the app going to use the LiDAR sensor in the future? This has been asked quite a bit. I tend to avoid hardware that I figure most people don't have once it sort of reaches a majority. So maybe in a few years, it would be really cool to do, but it also might be really cool just to make a new AR something. Which API do you think Apple would need to add at the next WWDC? Oh man, I would love access to the temperature sensors. There is a temperature sensor. It only gives you 4 temperature states. So I've kind of avoided making a challenge with that because I'm afraid someone will put their phone in an oven since people have done other weird things. How can you live cheaply in California? Good question coming from here. It's I think when you live with 3 other people out of college in a small town, it's not totally out of the question, especially with how tech and being an iOS developer tends to pay. You can always do some contracting. Do you have challenges that are available exclusively in one language? No, I think that would be a little bit limiting. I think that you mean like spoken languages, but no, there's one challenge that kind of involves that, but I like to keep it open to everyone. And then I think we have one more here. What is the level that was the most hard to debug? Oh, I have to think about that. Let's see. This one is still, I think, could use some calibration. Oh man, there's another one that uses QR codes, and you have to scan other people's QR codes, and they generate nonces and they expire and stuff. I was trying to do it without a server. That one was kind of hard to get working as I wanted it to with all the physics, but I think it looks pretty good now. So I think that's it. If anyone else has questions, feel free to find me on Twitter or anywhere else. I'm Warpling, should be up there somewhere. So thank you for this opportunity. Thanks for sticking around.